Hey, it's Matt, your average gamer, and for this video, we've got something totally different for you guys. We're going to be doing my top 8 creative builds in Elden Ring. All of these characters have specific play styles and armors. Everything's a lot of fun that we have in this video. Let's jump right in. First, we're going to start with our Bloodburn Samurai. This focuses on using the Great Katana, which has awesome AR in Keen Affinity with Bloodflame Blade. This will give you around 95 bleed or so, and you won't be sacrificing any physical damage. The concept here is to use overhead stance for a lot of damage and successive attack build up, and then when you back off, get in regular hits or charge attacks and continue to build up bleed, and of course get the little bit of a burn effect that Bloodflame Blade has. Samurai playstyles are one of the most fun in the game in my opinion because katanas have really cool movesets. There's a ton of different awesome Ash of Wars that you could use with katanas, and playing as a samurai gives you a versatile and fast playstyle that could take on the majority of bosses in the game, much like I am with Messmer here. Although I do get beat up a little bit, I ultimately end up taking him down at a decent speed using overhead stance primarily, and of course the Great Katana with Bloodflame Blade. All of the builds in this video are going to be much like this one in terms of how they're all kind of different with unique playstyles and armor sets. All the armor sets, by the way, are written in the description. That way I can go through your equipment fast, and if you're curious about any of the armor sets, each build has the armor sets written in the description. Let's jump into equipment. And we have the Keen Great Katana plus 25 with overhead stance. We're using Bloodflame Blade, Dragon Communion Seal. Armor set is in the description. Shard of Alexander, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Millicent's Prosthesis. We have Rolana's Cameo, and then we have the Thorny tier, Bloodsucking correct tier. Let's jump into stats. And for stats, we have 60 Vigor, 19 Mind, 31 Endurance, 15 Strength, 65 Dexterity, 25 Fate so we could use our buffs, 10 Arcane so we could use Bloodflame Blade. We have Golden Vow, Flame Grip Me Strength, Blessing Spoon, Bloodflame Blade, and we hit over 51 poise. I'm going to go over the buffing order now. And this is the specific buffing order that I like to use for this one. We're going to use Blessing Spoon for some extra HP. It helps with the Bloodsucking correct here. Golden Vow after, 15% more attack and defense. Both of those are longer buffs. Then Bloodflame Blade for some extra bleed. Fill up your FP, drink your Wondrous Physic, and then lastly use Flame Grip Me Strength, which is 20% more fire and physical damage. That's the shortest buff at around 30 seconds. And next up here, we have a Paladin Knight build. This one's incredibly fun to use. It involves a lot of holy damage using the Gargoyle's Black Blade, which has a really cool Ash of War that does holy and percentage damage, scales entirely with your Fate stat. And then, of course, we're going to be throwing in multi-layered Ring of Light and any other incantations you want to use. And we also ran another specific armor set for this one to give our character a cool look. All of these, of course, have themes and a good amount of damage, too. If you want to get in a lot of holy damage, this is a really good build for that. The Gargoyle's Black Blade is by no means bad, by the way. The Ash of War is actually pretty good in DLC because it's holy damage. And then any holy incantations would fit perfectly with this build, so you can even add on more if you want to. But overall, I really like the Paladin Knight type playstyle. A lot of fun. We finished with the Black Blade incantation there. This is definitely one to try if you like Paladin builds. Second, we're going to go over equipment and stats. And we have the Gargoyle's Black Blade plus 10, preferably the Erdtree seal. The armor set is in the description. Shard of Alexander, Godfrey Icon, Sacred Scorpion Charm, Flox Canvas Talisman, and then we have the Holy tier and Bloodsucking correct tier. Let's jump into stats. And for stats, we have 60 Vigor, 23 Mind, 28 Endurance, 18 Strength, 12 Dexterity. We have 70 Faith for this build. You're going to want a decent amount of Faith. We hit over 51 poise. Our buffs are Golden Vow, Hellish Brewery, Blessings of the Erdtree. We're using multi-layered Ring of Light and the Black Blade incantation. Let's jump into the buffing order. And for the buffing order here, we're going to use Blessings of the Erdtree first for some extra HP. Then we're going to use Golden Vow, of course. Then we're going to fill up our FP. We're going to use our Wondrous Physic. And then lastly, Hellish Brewery because it only lasts 40 seconds. After that, you could use whatever incantations you like, or use the Gargoyle's Black Blade, which I think is kind of a sleeper weapon for the DLC. Definitely worth trying out a build like this one because a lot of the bosses in DLC are weak to holy. And next up, we have the Frozen King build. We end up absolutely destroying Margit with this build. This involves two different things I'm going to show off. Firstly, we have the Bastard Sword in Cold Affinity with the Gravity Spin Ash of War, and then as our backup weapon, we're going to have fighting skills as well, all built around Frost. This is a really cool one that involves getting in posture damage, getting in a lot of successive attack damage, and then of course getting Frost build up to Morgot rather, got completely cornered there by our build. It looked initially like I was going to get cornered, and then he got cornered and taken down before he was even able to phase. I'll go over the second part of this when we go over the buffing order. Let's jump into equipment. And we have Dane's Cold Footwork plus 25 and Cold Affinity. We have the Bastard Sword with Gravity Spin and Cold Affinity, any seal. The armor set, again, is in the description. Shard of Alexander, Shattered Stone Talisman, Millicent's Prosthesis, Wing Sword Insignia, or Rotten Wing Sword Insignia if you have it. Thorny Tear, Bloodsucking Cracked Tear. We're using Margit Shackle to stun the boss. Let's talk about stats. And we have 60 Vigor, 19 Mind, 26 Endurance, 30 Strength, we have 35 Dexterity, we have 30 Intelligence, and 25 Faith. We're going to go over the buffing order here in a second and talk about the rest of the build. And of course, the rest of the build here, we're going to use Blessing's Boon in terms of the buffing order. Then we're going to use Golden Vow. Of course, remember to use the two longest ones first. Fill up our FP, drink our Wondrous Physic, and then lastly, we could use Flame Grant Me Strength. Now, the other part of the build is your backup weapon or main weapon if you want to use this primarily, and that's going to be Dane's Footwork. And of course, we're going to have the kicking ability in Cold Affinity. And you could use that again as your main weapon or the other one, but I like combining the two together and having the ability to switch to the sword with Gravity Spin and then switch to the fighting skills for a really cool and versatile build. And the next one up here is Fury of the Fire Knight. This, in my opinion, is probably the most fun one on here for most people because this is an awesome build to run. We get to use Rain of Fire and, of course, the Fire Knight's Greatsword with Flame Spear, building around pretty much a complete Fire Knight Greatsword. A little bit different in terms of what I use for the armor set. And they're all in the description. Every single armor set I use is written down in the description below. This is definitely one I recommend trying out for Faith builds. If you want a Faith build that does a lot of fire damage, running a Fire Knight's Greatsword if you have the DLC is absolutely a blast to use. Probably one of the most fun playstyles you can possibly run, and the damage is nothing to laugh about either. It's actually quite good. The Fire Knight himself, whenever you run into these, there's a reason why they're tough, and you get to run their build, and you get to be as tough as they are. Let's jump into equipment, stats, everything you need to know for an awesome Fire Knight's Greatsword build. And Fire Knight character, we have the Fire Knight's Flame Art Greatsword with Flame Spear. We have the Fire Knight Seal. The armor set's in the description. Shard of Alexander, Godfrey Icon, the Ash of War is chargeable. Fire Scorpion Charm, two-handed sword talisman for any regular hits. Flame Tear, Blood-sucking Cracked Tear. Let's jump into stats. And we have 60 Vigor, 23 Mind, 28 Endurance, 22 Strength, 18 Dexterity, 60 Faith for this build. We're using Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, Blessing's Boon, Rain of Fire, and then any other fire incantations you want to use. Now, for the buffing order here, we're going to use Blessing's Boon first. That helps with the blood-sucking cracked tear. You could use Blessings of the Erdtree, though. It's a little bit better. Golden Vow afterwards. Then we're going to fill up our FP, drink our Wondrous Physic. Flame Grant Me Strength last, of course, because it's the shortest. And then you get to use your awesome Ash of War. You get to get a lot of damage with the Fire Knight's Greatsword. One of the best weapons in the game, in my opinion. And then Rain of Fire. Fire Serpent we were using too, although that doesn't do too much damage. It is fun to use. And next up on here, we have the Shadow Reaper build. This is a really cool one in terms of the armor set. I really like this armor set. It's kind of funny, but it's awesome at the same time. And for this one, we're going to be using the Poison Flower Blooms Twice with the Grave Scythe on a Cult Affinity. And then on top of that, we're also going to be using Swarm of Flies to add in some additional bleed. So this is a bleed and rot build built around our Shadow Reaper character. In terms of looks, I like this and the Fire Knight's Greatsword build, the best one so far. The best two for me. Going through this whole list, though, a lot of these were really fun. They took time to make. I put a lot of effort in the builds I do, but sometimes I oversimplify stuff by going for Ashes of War and not mixing in enough stuff. So I decided to change it up for this video, do a couple of build requests that I threw in here, but at the same time also give you versatile and fun builds that give you a lot of options and keep Elden Ring fun, because that's the most important thing. And with Elden Ring Night Rain around the corner, we've got more Elden Ring coming this year. I know it's a roguelike and people are going to complain and say it's not a Souls game, but at the end of the day, it's still more Elden Ring stuff, and honestly, I'm excited for it. and keeping the game fun. The best game ever, in my opinion. I love Elden Ring. It's honestly the best game I've ever played in my life. Let's jump into equipment, stats, everything you need to know for a Shadow Reaper build. And we have the Colt Graves Scythe. We have it with the Poison Flower blooms twice. Our backup weapon is the Black Knife. We're using the Dragon Communion Seal. Once again, the armor set is in the description. Shard of Alexander, Kindred of Rot's Exaltation, Two-Handed Sword Talisman. We have Lord of Blood's Exaltation. We have the Faith tier and bloodsucking correct tier. Let's jump into stats. And we have 60 Vigor, 20 Mind, 28 Endurance, 17 Strength, 15 Dexterity. We have 40 Faith with the Faith tier and 50 Arcane. We're using Golden Vow, Hallister Brewery, Blessings of the Erdtree, and of course Swarm of Flies. We're going to jump into the buffing order now. And for the buffing order, we are going to first use Golden Vow or Blessings of the Erdtree, but for this one, we need the Faith tier first. So we're going to go Golden Vow and then Blessings of the Erdtree after we drink our Wondrous Physic. Lastly, Hallister Brewery. We talked about how that was relatively short, so that's going to be last. Fill up your FP, and then you could use Swarm of Flies, and of course you could use your Ash of War and any regular hits with the Grave Scythe and Occult Affinity for bleed buildup. And the next one was a build request, and that's for a Rakshasa cosplay. This is probably the easiest one to do on this list. Weed Cutter is actually pretty good. I was able to get a lot of damage out of it. I added the bloodsucking crack tier to it as well. Last time I covered this weapon was probably summer, but yeah, you can get a ton of stackable damage in terms of physical damage. The bleed on it, not too great. You can get blood procs though. The main focus isn't going to be bleed procs. The main focus is going to be getting in as much physical damage as you can get in, building up on successive hits, and continuing to use Weed Cutter. As long as you spam that Ash of War, you can get in a lot of hits. This is one of those situations where I recommend just mainly using the Ash of War, because as you continue to use it at a low FP and stamina cost, you continue to build up and get more physical damage. Let's jump into equipment and stats. And we have Rakshasa's Great Katana, preferably plus 10. We're using the Dragon Communion Seal, Rakshasa's armor set here. It's also in the description. Shard of Alexander, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Melissa's Prosthesis, Wingsword Insignia, or Rotten Wingsword Insignia is better if you have it. Thorny tier, Bloodsucking Crack tier. Let's talk about stats. And we have 60 Vigor, 19 Mind, 31 Endurance, 15 Strength, 65 Dexterity. We have 25 Faith for this build, 10 Arcane. This was the same stats I think I used for another build. You don't need the 10 Arcane though. Golden Vow, Flame Grip Strength, Blessing Spoon. Let's talk about the buffing order. And for our buffing order here, we are going to use Golden Vow. Well, you could use Golden Vow or Blessing Spoon first, but we're going to use Blessing Spoon first. So you could use either one first, then Golden Vow. They're both around 2 minutes. Fill up your FP, drink your Wondrous Physic, and then lastly, again, Flame Grant Strength is only 30 seconds, so that's always got to be last. And then we could use Weed Cutter for a lot of stackable damage. And the next one up here is a build for the Storm King. This is a Storm King build that I did, and this is kind of a different build. We're going to use the Sword of Milos, or Milos, if that's how you say it. We're going to use that for the debuff. That's going to give us extra damage. And then we're going to use the Sword of Solitude as our main weapon, giving us a little bit of storm power, and also having a great sword with good physical damage. And then we are using the Stormhawk Ash of War to add on to the build and to add on to the theme. This isn't one of the most powerful ones on there. This is more for fun and for people that like the Sword of Solitude. I wanted to add on to it. You could also do jump attacks because you do have a dual move set, but I'm not a big fan of the Sword of Milos as a whole. I'd rather use the Ash of War on the Sword of Solitude, and then of course use our Summon Spirit. It's pretty cool to add on to that build as well. And once again, the armor set for this one, which I ended up liking a lot, is in the description. Let's jump into equipment and stats. And for equipment, we have the Great Sword of Solitude, plus 10 preferably, Sword of Milos, plus 10 preferably, though you don't need much for the debuff. Any seal for buffs, the armor set's in the description. Shard of Alexander, Two-Handed Sword Talisman, we have the Claw Talisman, Arsenal Charms plus 1, or Great Jar's Arsenal if you have it, Green Burst Crystal tier, Bloodsucking Crack tier, and then we have Stormhawk, Dienth or Denth, or however you say it, if you want to add them to plus 10. I don't use summons that often. It's really cool to throw into this build. Let's jump into stats. Yeah, it's fun to throw in different themes. 60 Vigor, we have 54 Strength, Two-Handed, the Solitude weapon, you'll have over 80, 25 Faith. Let's go over the buffing order. If you want, you could always pause the stats screen. I know that one was relatively quick. We have Blessing Spoon first, then we're going to use Golden Vow. Keep in mind, you can do either one of those first. Then we're going to fill up our FP. We're going to drink our Wondrous Physic, of course. And then lastly, again, Flame Grant Me Strength is our final thing that we want to use because it's only 30 seconds. Then you could use the debuff on the Sword of Milos. And then, of course, the Sword of Solitude's awesome mesh. And then the last one on here was another build request. We have a Frostbitten Samurai, and that's going to use the Nagakiba for this build with On-Sheath. And this is a really cool one in terms of getting a lot of damage and getting a lot of frost build up. And of course, getting in some serious posture breaks as well. The whole concept for this fighting style on this one is to use On-Sheath as much as you possibly can to get in posture breaks. And if you have to from time to time, go for some regular hits to build up frost, but keep in mind you will get the frost debuff from using On-Sheath. It really only takes a couple hits for most bosses, probably about 3 or so before you can proc frost. And then once you do, you get a debuff on the boss. That's how frost works. You'll get additional damage from that point on, and you'll continue to use On-Sheath and go for poise breaking and big damage. I had a lot of fun with this one. I enjoy samurai builds. That's why there was a couple on here. 2 were build requests, and then the first one I just kind of made up and had a lot of fun with. Samurai builds, definitely recommend trying those out. The Fire Knight's Greatsword one earlier in this video, that's a really cool one to use. And of course, the Shadow Reaper was just an awesome playstyle and a really cool looking armor set in that one. Definitely different from what I normally do in my videos, and if you want to see more builds like these, be sure to comment below and put your thoughts below so I know in the future what to make for Elden Ring content. I also know some of the people on here that have build requested different things or looking for like early game guides and stuff like that. I'll put my latest early game guide in the description below. I'm going to do more of those soon. Hopefully make them as fun as possible so you can do some new and fresh playthroughs. I'm going to do a couple more early game builds upcoming, as well as some build requests and high level builds soon too. We're going to go over equipment here, stats, and then of course the buffing order like we did with all the other builds. And we have the Cold Nagakiba plus 25, preferably with On-Sheath. We have any seal for buffs. The armor set is in the description below. Shard of Alexander, Rolana's Cameo. Then we have Millicent's Prosthesis. Wingsword Insignia or Rot Wingsword Insignia if you have it. Those are for your regular hits. Thorny tier, Bloodsucking Crack tier. Let's jump into stats. And for stats, we have 60 Vigor, 19 Mind, 28 Endurance, 18 Strength, 55 Dexterity. We have 20 Intelligence, and 25 Faith. We're using Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, and Blessing Spoon. And of course, we hit 60 Poise and have a decent amount of defense for this build. In a second here, we're going to go over the buffing order for our On-Sheath build. And first things first, we're going to use Blessing Spoon. Then we're going to use Golden Vow. Like I said, you could use either one of those first because they're both around 2 minutes. Fill up your FP. Drink your Wondrous Physic, and then we're going to use Flame Grant Me Strength last. Again, shortest duration buff at 30 seconds, and then you get to use On-Sheath for a lot of damage. And thanks for watching this one. Thanks for tuning in to my top 8 creative and fun builds. I hope these were really different and enjoyable builds. I hope changing up the armor sets, playstyles, etc. was something that you guys enjoyed. If you did enjoy it, be sure to comment below so I know for future videos. And of course, if you like Elden Ring content, be sure to sub too. I will catch you guys in the next video. Going to work on some more early game builds as well as high level builds soon and some more build requests. See you soon.